Good evening, everyone. I'm Lynn Haltone. I'm the Executive Director of the Victoria Law Foundation, and it is my enormous pleasure to be here this evening at the Supreme Court of Victoria for a very special presentation between our two organisations, a conversation with Victoria's Chief Justice, the Honourable Anne Ferguson. It is a great opportunity, Your Honour, to talk to you on the 5th anniversary of your tenure as Chief Justice, and I think a great vantage point from which to look back over some of the major developments that have unfolded during your first 5 years. And I think in keeping with the themes of this evening, how patience and persistence and change have been applied over that period, and to consider also what the priorities are from here. But before we get underway, let me first acknowledge the traditional custodians of country wherever you may be joining us, but we are on Wurundjeri land. Both the Victoria Law Foundation and the Supreme Court are on Wurundjeri land, of course, of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders and to all the generations of Wurundjeri peoples and First Nations peoples, acknowledging that the lands and the waterways were never ceded. At the Foundation, we believe that acknowledging the past is an essential step in building a better and more equitable future. Chief Justice, would you like to add?
Thanks, Lynn, I would. I'd very much like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land, as Lynn has mentioned, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I add my respect to their elders, past and present, and those who are emerging as leaders amongst those nations.
Let's talk a little bit to begin with about being Chief Justice. What kind of a role is that for people who aren't familiar with your day-to-day responsibilities? I mean, you are the leading jurist of the state, and we'll talk a bit about how that plays into our understanding of democracy in a moment. But take us through a day in the life, or perhaps better, a week in the life of a Chief Justice, because there's an awful lot on your plate.
There's a lot to do, but that gives you a lot of interest. So to give you the example of this week, yesterday I was in court all day, sitting in the Court of Appeal, so the traditional role that one might expect a Chief Justice to have. But today's been dotted with meetings, so I have other roles apart from being Chief Justice. I'm the Chair of Court Services Victoria, which is the organisation that provides the administrative support to all of the Victorian courts and VCAT. I chair the Judicial College of Victoria, which is the body that educates judges, runs training sessions for them. I chair the Judicial Commission, which deals with complaints against judicial officers. So I have quite a few different roles, and my day today was made up with meetings with the CEO of Court Services Victoria, meeting with the CEO of the Supreme Court of Victoria, meeting with the President of the Court of Appeal and the principal judges of each of the trial divisions of the court. So there's that sort of role. There are things like this afternoon, we're here together talking, so it's
diverse.
It's diverse.
I suppose most people would not consider the administrative dimension to your role. They have a vision perhaps of wigs and gowns, which are, as we know, pretty outmoded, but that's the impression of a Supreme Court judge, and especially of a Chief Justice. So in terms of the way your week lines up, how much time do you spend judging?
It varies. It really varies. So people also see a judge in the court, but they don't realise that a lot of the work that we do, probably most of the work that we do, is outside the court. So the example yesterday, I was in court all day, but I had spent, I think, the best part of 3 days last week preparing for it. There's now, you come out of court, you've got to think about what you're going to decide. You've got, there's judgment writing. So it takes up a lot of out-of-court time as well. The admin, it's almost like you're using a different part of yourself, because it's a different way of thinking. It's less reflective a lot of the time, not all of the time, and it fits in between things. So over when we broke for lunch yesterday, there are a couple of emails that had come in that I knew that I could get out quickly, and other people could get on with the work that they needed to get on with. So it fits around, I suppose, that judicial role.
But as you say, that's a really different mindset to be an administrator of a very significant operation, both the Supreme Court itself, but then, as you say, the broader court system under Court Services Victoria. So does that mean you have to think about staffing and buildings and all that stuff? Hopefully you have a useful team of CEOs who manage that.
There are a lot of people that assist me. It's certainly not a one-person show. And yes, I have to think about things like that at a level, but I'm not dealing with the day-to-day. There are very good people who can deal with that.
We're going to talk about the craziness that set in when that day-to-day became something entirely different in a few minutes. But before we leave the role of the Chief Justice, I do want to talk a bit about how that fits into our understanding of our democracy, because it is such a critical dimension. There are three legs to the stool, if you like, of our democracy: the Parliament, the Executive and the Judiciary. And you represent the judiciary in that triumvirate. You are the representation, for want of a better word, of the rule of law for our community. So how does that inform the way you undertake the role of Chief Justice?
I often think about things in the way of what would it be like if you didn't have something. So if you use that test in this context, what would it be like if you didn't have a judiciary that was independent of the Parliament and the Executive? What would it be like if you didn't have a judiciary who didn't apply fairness as a core element of what they do? What would it be like if you didn't have courts where not everybody was equal before them? So that sort of thinking informs what approach you take. And when I reflect about what's the main thing that I think about in most of what I do, it's what's the fair thing. And that's core, I think, to the role of a judge. It's core to my role as Chief Justice, and it's core to our democracy that I do that.
And critical in balancing the other two aspects
Yes.
of that democracy. So independence is absolutely vital, and I think there are myriad examples through history and around the world even now where those notions of independence and the centrality of fairness are not always in evidence. But your determination to be independent amongst those three dimensions, does that set the parameters of your role? I mean, how close do you get, or can you get, to the other branches of government? You have a relationship, I imagine, with them. You do, and in a sense, your engagement with them is fulfilling your role. It's fulfilling your role. So it's you keep your boundaries, you keep your parameters, if you like that language, but you're fulfilling that important part of saying, okay, let's test this. What can I do? What should I be doing? What's the right thing to do? Looking at the equality of people before you. So it's, that's really how I approach it. And is that always your first lens? I imagine it's kind of so entrenched.
I think that it is, and it is right from, I started with legal studies when I suppose I was about 17. So it starts at an early age, and then that just continues with you. It's so much so that you just take it for granted. And when people ask you the question, it's sometimes hard to bring it to the front because it's just there.
Yes. It's so much a part of the way you understand the world.
That's right. It's just intrinsic.
Yes. Were you always committed to fairness? Was that something that you remember as a 17-year-old?
Oh, I don't remember that far back. That's a long time ago now. I think I was. I think that, the fair go. I grew up in an age where that was sort of the language.
Yeah.
and it probably was. Yeah.
How do you, as the sort of senior representative of the profession, how do you engage with the profession, with your fellow judges, with the legal fraternity? What's your responsibility there as a leader in that domain?
I think that it's always important to listen, and legal training doesn't always lead you to being a good listener. So you need to ask questions and you need to listen to what people are telling you and not always assume that you know what's best for them. And that therefore requires a lot of consultation. Doesn't mean that when you consult everybody's going to get what they want, but you need to understand the different perspectives. So with the profession, there are the formal routes through, the President of the Law Institute, the President of Victorian Bar, there are other organisations, Victoria Legal Aid, talking to the leaders of the various organisations is one way. But it shouldn't be forgotten that before I was a judge, I was in the profession. So of course, you know people in the profession. You have that anecdotal, and it is anecdotal, engagement with people as well. So there's that process. And really it's a case of, ask a few questions and listen and then engage in the conversation rather than going in with a whole lot of assumptions that may be ill-founded.
When you're Chief Justice, do people come to you more often or less with their insights? Do people stay away?
It's hard to I do try to encourage people to come to me. I don't know that I'm very successful at them actually doing that. So it depends quite frequently on how well the person knows me or the engagement that they've had with me. And when I reflect on this, I think about the time before I was at the court and what I would have thought of the Chief Justice then. And there's no way that I would have engaged. Now, I would hope to project in a different way that I do want to hear.
Yeah.
I do want that information. If there's something that's not working, if you don't tell me, I can't do anything about it.
Exactly right. But I suppose the title, the formality of the role tends to create a bit of distance, and there's that dimension, and then there's also just the fact that they probably assume you're incredibly busy, which you undoubtedly are. So
yeah, I am, but that doesn't mean that you don't have time for people and you don't have time to listen and engage. You have to make time for that in this role.
That seems to me a very contemporary understanding of what a Chief Justice is about.
Oh, I don't know. It's for others to decide.
I think in the past people might have felt that a Chief Justice who is really committed to listening and consulting might be quite a new thing.
I don't know. As I say, that's really for others to decide how, what labels they want to put on it.
Yes, but it's your style.
It's what I try to do. I'm human, so I'm not always, I don't always achieve it.
Well, let's talk about the things you do achieve, because I think, like the rest of the world, the pandemic dropped this major bomb in the middle of your first 5 years in the role. And I think we've all got stories about how it unfolded. Do you remember when you first heard about the pandemic and realised, okay, this is going to change things up? Take us back to the origins.
I don't know that I thought it was going to change things up, but I do recall waking up to the news one morning and they were talking about coronavirus, and I was listening to this and I thought, now I've got to remember that word. I've got to remember that word. I'm not very good at remembering things, diseases or names or that sort of thing. I thought, I've really got to, and I practiced it and practiced it and practiced it in my head. I didn't need to bother with doing that. I can assure you.
You can trip it off now.
Yeah, I can. Or its shorter version, COVID-19. So yeah, I do remember that quite well. I don't remember when I realised that this was going to have the impact that it's had.
I vividly remember saying to our office manager at work that we'd all be back by Easter. She said, "Oh, I don't think so." She was right. So tell us what did happen, given all your roles as, the head of court services, as the person running the Supreme Court, or at least responsible for the running of this place. What then happened in terms of the queue of people outside your door, the number of meetings that had to transpire about, right, we need to send people home. How are we going to keep the wheels turning here in that circumstance?
We were fortunate at the Supreme Court that we'd already started on a digital journey. So we were better placed than some others, and we hadn't completed the journey, but we had at least started and we were a fair way through. So for us it was really a case of accelerating. It did require upskilling in a very short period of time, but essentially within 3 weeks we were operating with hardly anyone physically in the court buildings.
3 weeks?
Yeah. And we started that really not knowing, for how long. There were glitches, of course there were glitches, but patience, persistence, and it was a combined effort. The profession were fantastic in supporting the courts to keep the work going. The judges were solely focused on ensuring that we kept hearings going, different formats obviously, but yeah.
There was an incredible commitment, I think, across certainly the justice sector, but more broadly in the community as well, about all hands to the pump and let's make this work. And I think people, certainly I imagine in your world, were really focused on the need to maintain the commitment to justice, that it could not stop.
Yeah.
Was that ever, was there any consideration at all about, okay, we'll just shut the doors?
Not at all. In fact, it was quite the reverse. We were adamant that we were not going to shut our doors. They were just going to be different doors. They were going to be virtual.
Yes.
And there was no way that was going to happen. Yes, we had to stop the jury trials, but other work we were able to keep going and the doors never closed.
I think there is an enormous, or there will be, tail to all of this, and we'll deal with that, as it comes to pass. But you must be enormously proud of what was achieved in that period.
It's about our role is making sure that the community gets what it deserves from our part of the justice system. The justice system's broader than just the courts, and so yes, I'm very pleased that we were able to do that, and I'm very grateful for the cooperation across the board so that we were able to achieve that. But it's not a sense of self-satisfaction, it's a sense of we had to do that. That's our job. This is what we do to serve the community. So, yeah, it's important that we kept going.
Yes, absolutely. It did present enormous challenges. You've mentioned one in terms of jury trials, which did have to come to a halt. But it did also present some extraordinary breakthroughs. As you've said, the move to a a more digital approach had begun, but it got turbocharged
Yeah.
in that period. So what would you keep from that experience?
So I mentioned before the importance of listening to people, and in listening to people, I very much understand that each individual's experience from the pandemic is slightly different. And similarly, when you're talking about virtual hearings, there are a range of views about them. And so the task now is to really examine what's the optimum use. It's not 100% virtual, it's not 100% in person, I'm convinced of that, but what the balance is and what it's for, we've got to work through, and we've got more consultation to do. But I do think that it's important that we don't just snap back to March 2020. That would be, I think, a real loss of a huge opportunity. And you've seen it before that people often after an event such as this, there's a lot of comfort in the past.
Yes.
But it's rose-coloured glasses. It never was as good as people would like to think it was. So let's take the best of the past,
Yes.
but also let's take the best of the recent past, and let's do it on the basis of proper evidence and proper analysis.
As you say, I hear a lot about people who find an online experience much more convenient, especially for shorter procedures. And then others who are quite put off at the prospect of having their justice delivered down a Zoom line. So it is really challenging to try and find that balance.
It is, and I always thought it'd be harder coming out of the pandemic than going in, and I think that's right.
You were right. Why did you think that? I suppose, as we've discussed, going in is kind of, right, problem solve, how do we deal in this immediate circumstance? Whereas the coming out requires a lot more, as you've said, consultation and thinking and trying to understand how we deliver that fairness in a new mode.
I think so. If you've only got one option, you've only got one option,
Yeah.
and that's really what we had at the start.
Yeah.
And now there are lots of options, and it's just harder to work out which is the best. There won't be any that's perfect.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think, as you say, it would be a terrible loss to move past all the developments that we've seen develop over the last 3 years or so. But one of the things I'm really interested in terms of the impact of the pandemic and what it did for a general awareness of issues and of, in your case in particular, the way the courts function. So the courts have always been open, even though most of us don't think to sort of toddle into the Supreme Court and sit in the bleachers and watch. But they have opened up so much more as a result, both of online exposure, but even before that there was some greater transparency, I suppose, some broadcast of particularly high-profile hearings and the like. What's the quid pro quo in that? What's the balance to be found in terms of opening justice up, but making sure that is not affected in any way by what's a pretty toxic media environment at some points in time? Do you ever feel that there's a risk?
What often gets lost in the conversation about streaming proceedings is, you touched on it, you said, the courts were always open, you could always come. And people tend not to. But in the high profile cases,
They did.
they did. And that can get a bit lost in the conversation when we're talking about should we stream or shouldn't we stream? You know, the pressure of being in a courtroom packed with journalists, the reporting of it,
Yeah.
you know, that was always there. So we were constrained by our physical environment as to the number that could fit in the courtroom, and that's gone now. So I think we just need to reflect a little bit on how different is it. And in a sense, I'm not sure that it's very different. Just a different mode, and you have more people, but you know, once you get to your critical mass of people, it doesn't really matter whether it's, you know, 50 or it's 100.
5,000.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you don't feel the ill effects then of trolling or mean behaviour? You don't have an exposure to that?
I don't personally, because I don't engage with it.
Yeah, very wise.
You know, I'm sure it's there, but I'm not going to engage with it.
There is also, though, I suppose, in any judicial life, and even before that, in as you said, you know, your experience in the profession, an exposure to pretty tough aspects of life and death. And the Supreme Court is where those cases are heard, and it can be pretty brutal. So do you have I think, or do you think the public has a broader understanding of the stuff you deal with? I wonder about that.
Well, I suspect that they do for a lot of the work that we do, because it's on the news, it's in the newspapers. So I suspect that they do have that understanding. And, you know, there are a lot of crime shows too.
But I suppose, should I not have you know, thought it through, I'm not sure I would have thought about the cumulative impact of that, the sort of vicarious trauma that comes with day after day being witness to some of the most hideous aspects of human nature. Is there a sense that you need to pay attention to what impact that has on people in the court?
It's now well recognised that it's an issue across the justice system, and we have supports in place for judges and for staff, and we're continuing to work with that. We've had sessions dealing with mental health awareness training for staff, for managers, for, you know, the judicial officers who have leadership positions. So we recognise the issue. We've put supports in place. Does that mean that that's sufficient? You know, these things you learn all the time, and there's always more that you can do. But we're very conscious of the impact of the work and the impact that it can have on people.
And you know, we've had some really tragic episodes in courts in Victoria of people who have suffered really intensely with what we assume is that sort of cumulative effect of their exposure. But what about you? How do you handle that stress in terms of the stuff you hear and the decisions you need to make?
I only read what I need to read. I only look at what I need to look. So limit your exposure as much as you're able to, while still being able to perform your role. Debriefing, you know, the sort of talking to people, making sure you go and do something else, take your mind away, those sorts of things. But there's no doubt that some of the work, you know, stays with you.
Yes.
But you have your ways of
Techniques.
Yeah, exactly.
When you say do things that take your mind away, what do you do? What takes your mind away?
Well, I'm obsessed with my football team.
Let me
and
guess.
that's very stressful, watching my football team from time to time,
Well,
but also very joyful.
Squeaked into the 8 this week, so, you know.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to talk about the footy, but...
we should declare that you are a Richmond
I am
fan.
an avid Tigers supporter.
Is that lifelong?
Since I was 4.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, there's things like that where I don't, at the moment, I'm not going to the matches. I haven't got back to it after the pandemic, but, you know, I loved going and sitting in the outer
Yes.
and listening to
Yes.
some of the comments. That would bring a smile to my face. And, you know, so footy's obviously a big thing for me. But things like, you know, making sure that I exercise, doing some exercise every day, releasing the endorphins in that way, engaging with, you know, friends, colleagues, people who aren't in the law.
Yeah.
Family are really grounding. None of my family are lawyers, so you talk to them, they haven't got a clue about what you're doing.
Glaze over.
Exactly. And I don't talk about work with them. So I think those sorts of things are really important. And knowing when to call it a day, you know, recognising that you don't do your best work if you're exhausted and you can only be effective for so long.
That's a very impressive self-discipline, to know when to call it, I think. And certainly, you know, I'm sure this is the case in very many professions, but it's renowned in the law that people just push and push and push and stay. And as you say, I think probably getting less and less effective as the hours pass.
Yeah. And remember, I did say I am human, so I don't always
abide by your own rules.
I think the older I get, the better I am at
Yes.
it. The more I see that, you know, you become completely ineffective.
This is off track a bit, but do you know are there points in the day when you know you're better at some stuff than others? I suppose I've just begun to really recognise that I'm very good at some things in the morning and I can sort of push through a whole lot of stuff. Whereas if I'm doing something late in the afternoon, then I tend to try and find something fairly mundane.
Yeah.
Do you have those tactics?
Well, I know I'm not good when I'm tired and I know I'm not good when I'm hungry. So, you know, those types of things. And it does vary from day to day.
Yes.
But in the classic, I'm not a morning person, I'm not a morning person.
You're not a morning person. I suppose, yeah, I spent way too long getting up really early in the morning.
You did.
So it resulted in being a morning person, bizarrely enough, and now I can't break the habit, which is very frustrating. But the other dimension, I suppose, to well-being that I really wanted to talk to you about, because it's had such, I think, a diversity of exploration of late. I mean, you co-commissioned with the Attorney General the Zoki report, Helen Zoki's investigation into the experience of people working in courts and tribunals. The Victorian Legal Services Board did some broader surveying around the legal sector in terms of experience of sexual harassment, and the Law Reform Commission did a really critical inquiry into the experience of people coming to the legal system having suffered sexual offences. So there's a lot of dimensions and angles coming in around the experience, and let's be frank about it, principally of women, as either working in or coming to the law. And it's been pretty revelatory and not brilliant, you'd have to say. Is this a bit of a wake-up call across the board, do you think?
I think the Zoki report was really, really important, and it was started on the basis of there's an issue here, how do we tackle it? How do we prevent this from happening? And if we can't prevent it, what do we do to support the people who have been adversely affected? So that work, I think, was incredibly important, and I am really pleased that the recommendations are being implemented. So there were 16 recommendations that were directed to the bodies that I'm associated with, Court Services Victoria, Judicial Commission, Judicial College. There was one that was directed to me personally in relation to the appointment of Queen's Counsel, Silks. And of the 16 recommendations that were directed to us, 9 of them have been completed and the other 7 are all underway. So I think that that's important, but it's not a set and forget.
No, it's not a moment in time,
No.
really, is it?
And
you have to keep this up.
Yeah, and one of the recommendations around a campaign, campaigns go for a long time, and it's important for me and for the other heads of jurisdiction, and they're as adamant about this as what I am, to say this behaviour must stop, it's not good enough, and to really take that approach of thinking about it from the perspective of the person who's impacted, and again listening. Listening's really important. So I think that work is really important, but the implementation of the recommendations is more where my focus is,
Yes.
I suppose.
And the ongoing commitment to that.
Yeah.
So, there may be a time in 5 years where you need Helen or someone like her back to say, look at this again, make sure we're still...
Yeah, well, one of the recommendations was for auditing, so that will occur. I think that's after 2 years as a requirement, and there's recommendations around surveying. So we will be monitoring, and I'm hopeful that we'll make ground, but again, it's for others to judge that and to tell us.
Yes, but you'll do what you can in
Oh,
terms
absolutely.
of the recommendations and commitment.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we've seen this in other courts, in other jurisdictions, where there's been some very strident action, certainly in the High Court, around making this very transparent and bringing the sunshine in, I suppose, as the key disinfectant. But what about the experience of people coming to the court? I mean, the VLRC work was about the barriers to reporting, the experience of going through a court process around a sexual offence. I mean, that seems to me to be a really critical development too, that we understand better why people don't report or don't proceed. Even if they start the process, lots fall away.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you, like me, know people who've been adversely impacted, and that experience, when I was talking before about engaging with the profession, you also have these other engagements where you hear. So I'm very alive to the impact of the court system, and have it forefront. So whenever we're approaching anything, we're looking at it from the perspective of the person coming into the court, whether that's the litigant, whether it's the barrister, whether it's the solicitor, whoever it might be. How can we as a court, within the parameters that we have, make this the best experience it can be, recognising that it's going to be awful.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be in a court.
No, it's not generally your best day, is it, when you're coming to court?
Well, except for the young lawyers who are coming to be admitted into the profession. That's a joyful day. But
yes.
Apart from that, there aren't many occasions where anyone wants to be in a court. So I think we use the shorthand user, looking at it from the user's perspective, but it's the people. It's about the people. It's the people coming to the court. How do we make it better?
So that goes back to fairness too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. All of these things are linked.
So I think we are developing a much broader understanding of the the parameters of fairness, of what the inputs are, if you like, to make something fair. And that's about people's mental well-being, it's about the processes and procedures that they go through, it's about the support that they get along the way. So it's changing.
I think that it is, but it always has. You know, it was different when I started out to what it had been 50 years before that.
Yes, true, absolutely. Let's talk a bit about, I want to circle back to the idea of you know, your role as representing one of those key pillars in our democratic system, because there's been a lot of debate, and interestingly the pandemic has also had an impact on this, but more recently, over the last 20 odd years, faith in institutions has just been tracking down and down, and I think politically that's probably been the most evident, that our politicians are, I don't know if they were ever particularly revered, but you know, whatever, it seems that they're less so now. But when it comes to the court, that is absolute, I mean, well, it comes to the democratic process, it's critical, but it's really vital that the community maintains a very, very strong sense of trust in the court and the court system. How do you consider, or what do you consider to be the key issues in terms of maintaining that level of community trust?
It's incredibly important for the reasons that I spoke about earlier on, that you've got a court that you can trust, that's going to treat people fairly, that is going to be transparent in its procedures, and if you don't have that, what have you got? And again, that idea of what would it be like if you didn't have it. A few years ago I was in the Northern Territory and was on one of the tours that are conducted up there, and met a young couple from another country, and we got chatting, and you know, the usual, what do you do? And
by the way, what do you say when people say, "Oh, Anne, great to meet you, what do you do?"
I now say I'm a judge. You get there eventually, so it's quicker. It's quicker to say it, and
fair enough.
You know, it's not anything to be embarrassed about.
No.
And the more people that can meet a judge,
yes,
that's true. That's not a bad thing.
It's a good thing for people to get to know you.
Yeah. So this young couple, their parents were judges, and they said, so they're almost the first thing they said to us is, how do you cope with the bribery and your security? And like, I was shocked. You know, I don't have to confront that. We don't have to confront that in Australia. But that's what it might be like if we don't have that trust and faith in public institutions like the courts. You don't want that.
And I wonder if we tend to think of ourselves as being quite immune from those sorts of pressures. But I don't know if you saw it, but there was a very forensic exploration of the family court murders of the 70s and 80s. And, you know, that was a very particular set of circumstances. But still, you know, that was a terrifying time. And I think the recognition that our judges were, you know, under that kind of physical threat was shocking, deeply shocking.
Yeah.
And thankfully that hasn't been the case for, you know, a long time, and long may that remain. But it's something we need to guard against, isn't it?
Absolutely. I don't want to live in a country like the one that couple came from. I really don't. And I think it's incredibly important that we do what we can. And part of that, I think, it goes back to the trying to do everything we can to open the courts so that people understand the work that we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, you know, I'm very keen on doing whatever we can to have that transparency. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is why we made that decision. You might not be happy with it, but did you go away feeling that you had a fair hearing? It's critical.
So the other dimension to this is whether or not, and people talk about this in all sorts of facets of life as well outside of the law, people see themselves represented in their courts. And Law Reform Commission, Australian Law Reform Commission did some work recently on this, which I think was tabled in the Parliament quite recently. So that's about making sure that our courts look like our community. Is that something that you bear in mind as well?
Absolutely. I think diversity is, really important. We know that organisations that have a diverse workforce do better, the people within them do better, and the people they engage with do better. So why wouldn't we apply that to the justice system? And it would be fantastic to reflect the diversity of our community. We've started along the way, but there's a way to go.
There's a way to go. And is that a priority for you?
Well, I'm not the one that makes the appointments, but yes, it is.
Yes.
To the extent that you can, it is. And I sit on the ceremonies admitting the new lawyers, and you look out there and you're obviously only going on looks, and that only takes you so far, pretty limited, but it looks like a more diverse group of people who are coming through, and the challenge is going to be, as it has been in other areas, to make sure that they're there when they get to the senior ranks.
Yes.
And gender's one strand of diversity. We've made great strides, I think, with gender. You look back, 30 years ago, you didn't have any women on this court, and that's not the case now by a long shot. But there's other aspects of diversity that we don't at the moment reflect, and we need to do everything to ensure that the profession's encouraged to be as diverse as it can be.
And as you pointed out, a couple of times, I think the counterfactual is the ultimate test, isn't it? So what happens if this doesn't proceed in this way?
Then you risk the lack of faith in the institution. You simply won't be enabling people to feel that they've got the best experience that they could have coming into the court. And that doesn't mean that you have to have someone who's of the same, cultural or ethnic background as you. You don't, but you do need to see that range of views, I think, and the range of experience. It's a lot about experience diversity.
So, given all we've discussed and the fact that you have now racked up 5 years, what's on the horizon?
It's the same, path that we started out on. It's the, put yourself, let's see what we can do to make this a better experience for the people that come into the court. Let's look at trying to ensure that we're looking after health and well-being of the people who work in the courts, and recognising the importance of that. Learning all the time, listening to people's experiences, taking, if you take the technology, taking the best of it. Always, always, always saying, okay, well, we're doing this now. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing that? Is that a good idea to do it? Is there a better way to do it? And sometimes the answer to that is no. Actually, the way that you're doing it's pretty good. But a lot of the time it's, well, we could do this or we could make that improvement, and streamlining, So it's that same path.
Yes.
And always remembering, why are you doing this? You're doing it for the people that are coming to the court. You're doing it for the community.
It's up against, though, a backdrop of the law having this reputation, as misguided as this might be, of being a fusty old place full of people pretty fixed in their perspectives. So is there a tension in that at all?
In the sense of the
pushing-
perception.
Yeah, and moving it on.
You just have to keep going. You can't worry about it. You just can't. You wouldn't do anything. You'd be paralysed. You know, you've got to get on and show it, and you've got to demonstrate it. I like a plan, but I like action a lot better than a plan.
Yeah.
You know, I really do. And that's, you know, go back to the Zoki report. That's the plan. Well, now it's happening.
Let's action it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very, very pleased that you actioned this. So it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time today, but also for your service, particularly for the last 5 years, which have been incredibly tumultuous. And I think, as you say, there is so much to learn from what we've been through, and hopefully we can take the upsides from that and make the courts and the justice system even more open to the people of Victoria than they have been thus far. But it's been a great pleasure.
Well, thank you, Lynn, and I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank the Foundation for giving me the opportunity to speak to those that might be tuning in, and to say all the best for the Foundation going forward for the work that you do, which is really important as well.
Well,
so thank you.
We appreciate that enormously, and I think, you know, a quick thanks to the team who made this event happen: Kate Sedgwick, Helen Papadimitriou and Jackie Matthews at the Foundation, and Sarah Dolan and Sophie Meixner from the Supreme Court of Victoria, without whom this would not have transpired. And thank you also very much indeed for joining us, and have a good evening.